everyone joining us today on this Facebook Live conversation. I would particularly like to welcome Mr. Iain Campbell, a senior fellow at the Rocky Mountain Institute. Rocky Mountain Institute has been doing some exceptional work globally, and also we are very happy that we also are part of the leadership that we get from Rocky Mountain Institute. Welcome, Iain, to this conversation on Facebook Live.
Yeah, thank you. So a pleasure to join you on this.
Thank you, Iain. While we get into the topic that we have today, I think it will be good for all who have joined us today to give a very brief background of the Rocky Mountain Institute, the work that you're doing, particularly on cooling, and how you're supporting the government and other bodies in India. Iain?
Yeah, so Rocky Mountain Institute, we're a non-profit organization, basically a research institute, but we go a little beyond research. We actually move to the space of demonstration and working with market players to show solutions that can accelerate the transition to a clean energy future. So that's both on the supply side of the energy system, but also on the demand side. And one of the biggest demands of the energy system looking forward is going to be cooling. And we initiated a competition, the Global Cooling Prize, with the support of Mission Innovation and the government of India to really shine a spotlight on the cooling space and help us all identify next generation technology that can make cooling more affordable from a life cycle cost perspective, and also reduce its impact on our energy systems and on our climate. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak about one of our favorite topics.
Thank you, Iain. Thank you so much for summarizing the great work that is being done in RMI across the world. So let me begin with the first topic that we would pick up is, what is the need for sustainable cooling in a world which is getting warmer by the day? And can I have that small write-up on the screen, which I think will enable our discussion? Very briefly, if we look at the next 3 decades, the demand for room air conditioner will go almost 4 times. And I'll kind of identify 2 very important elements. One from the global perspective, where if unchecked, this demand could, and the emissions that this demand would create, could increase global temperatures by as high as 0.5 degree centigrade by 2100. Now, we're only talking about cooling. There are many other energy using sectors like industries, transport, and so on and so forth. And remember, we are the Paris Accord talks about 1.5 degree centigrade limitation of temperature. Secondly, coming back to India, 2 things which are pointed out, that we will see almost 5 times increase in cooling demand in India between now and 2050. And this we are comparing at 2018 levels, because the air conditioner penetration in India is, as per the households, is not more than 6 to 7%. And the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is one of the premier research institution in Berkeley, has done a study a few years ago that just look at the end of this decade, 2030. If we go by the efficiency standard that has been mandated in India, just the cooling will need 150 gigawatts, 150,000 megawatts of incremental demand only for cooling. Now, my question to you, given that you have been in as RMI, as your own self, supporting many other such programs, not just in India, but several other developing and developed countries, what could be the nudges that can be given on the policy front, on the regulatory front, awareness front, or any other thing that you should, that if we can get to a trajectory of efficiencies, which again, if you look at the last bullet, LBNL very clearly say that if you take a higher path of efficiency, the ambition for efficiency increases, we can reduce this demand by as much as 60 gigawatt, which is quite substantial. And And in terms of money, for India, if you have to set up 60 gigawatt of thermal power plants, that's about 100 billion US dollars in the next 10 years. So it's a substantial amount of money that we're talking about. I'm not looking at the economic benefits. So let me hand it over to Iain. If you could tell us from your experience, your guidance, what could India do?
Yeah, so let me maybe just add a little something here, so just on the framing, and it's kind of how we think about the cooling challenge. Is that with urbanization, increased urbanization trends, and rising temperatures because of global warming, access to cooling is being viewed more and more as a societal and developmental need, and it's a need that is going to be satisfied. But if we do it with the equipment and the technologies and the practices that we do today, it comes at a horrible energy system and environmental cost, and one actually that our planet cannot afford. So the thing that we have to solve for to ensure that there is access to affordable cooling to all of those that have need, we have to solve on the environmental and impacts on our energy system of how we deliver cooling today. And to your point, there's two elements of it with cooling. One is the direct emissions associated with refrigerants, and the other is the indirect emissions associated with energy use. And the latter are actually significantly greater, although they're both together have a significant impact from an environmental perspective. So we have to transition to lower global warming potential refrigerants, and the world is working towards that with the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. But we have to have more efficient equipment. And to frame what happens today, and I'm going to talk about the room air conditioning segment, when you go out, and we'll have a lot of people, I think, because of what's happening with COVID-19, that are going to try and get cooling in their home because they're working from home. When you go out to the store and you look at those shiny white appliances, to get one installed in your home would maybe cost you 35,000 rupees. But that purchase will probably cost you 150,000 rupees in energy costs over the next 10 years. And that is not very visible. So people don't have all the information they need to be able to make smart decisions. And those higher efficient technologies tend to come with a higher first cost. So there's a whole tool set that can be deployed that can help people be better informed, make the right decisions, and to help defray some of that upfront cost. And that starts with things like awareness. It starts with the labeling system, and obviously you have the 5-star system there in India today. Minimum energy performance standards to take the worst performing equipment off the market so that consumers aren't duped by low-priced equipment that is going to cost a huge amount of money to operate. Potentially incentives for the most efficient equipment. And then some of the things that you work on at EESL around demand aggregation, bulk procurement, to be able to bring down the price of the higher efficiency equipment and make that more accessible to the populace. And there's other things as well about utility on-bill finance programs, pay-as-you-save type programs. There's a lot of tools that are out there, but it really starts with the awareness and policy signals to enable the market to work more efficiently and for people to have the information that they need to make smarter decisions.
Yeah, thanks. I think Iain, you have brought me to a point where I would like to also give this in a practical example. And since you're talking about distribution utilities and what is the financial impact such low efficiency cooling has. So about 4 years ago, we were doing a study in distribution companies across the country. And we also looking at the load profiles, daily load profiles and yearly load profiles of a discom in Delhi, including many others. We were very amazed to see that there is a peak between 3:20 p.m. for half an hour, and it was a peak of about 500 megawatt. Right. Remember, and this was a very unusual thing because you don't see peak demand during that time period. So we investigated a bit further just for others to understand what Iain is proposing, and it is something which is extremely important for a country like India. We found out that is the time when children come back from school, they get into the houses and just put air conditioners on. And after half an hour, they are either out for studies or playing. Now, as a utility, if you have to give 24/7 power, you have to make that additional investment in getting that 400 or 500 megawatt, which otherwise you will not be able to supply. And therefore, the study showed that if people migrated to a super efficient air conditioners, that 500 megawatt of procurement would have gone down to 250 megawatt or less. So, Iain, my question, you referred to this. I know many US state utilities do this, which is called utility-driven demand-side management, where consumers like these, where these are peculiar problems and you can solve it by nudging people to invest into efficient equipment because they are high cost. So utilities share the benefit, because if I reduce my power procurement cost from 500 megawatt to 250 megawatt, I gain. So I will give $100 rebate to or a discount as a coupon to Iain. So Iain, if this has to be implemented in a country like India, which is now going to see a massive surge in demand, what are the 2-3 prescriptions that you would propose to policymakers and regulators?
Yeah, so just to reinforce the point you make, I mean, as you said earlier, household penetration of air conditioning in India is about 6%. Here in the US, it's about 90%. And so we know very well what that does to the energy system. And on the hottest days in the summer, about 50% of the electricity supply is going towards cooling. It can be up to 50% in cities that, so New York, for example, that would be being used for cooling. So it has a direct correlation to peak load, and therefore has a direct correlation as to how much capacity gets added. And I think there's kind of three things that you can do, but the first one is reduce the load. So is making sure that the cooling equipment that goes onto the system is as efficient as is economically viable. And that's kind of the smartest thing, because you can actually, to your point, you can cut the load on the grid, and therefore the need for additional generation and distribution infrastructure, you can cut it by at least a half by going to most efficient technologies. Once you've done the reduced, or in conjunction with the reduced, you then look at the opportunity to shift load. And cooling is one of the things where there is a very active demand response programs that are in place in areas that have significant penetration. And there's two ways to do that. One is you cycle air conditioners off for a number of hours, and you compensate consumers to do so. The other way is that you have very large district cooling plants that have thermal storage, and they will make ice during the night and use that ice to provide cooling during the day. So, and they get compensated to shift load to nighttime production of cooling that's distributed gently through the day as it's transformed from ice. The other thing, which I think is interesting for utilities, is it's actually a lower cost investment for a utility to provide an incentive to go to more efficient technology than to put in additional generation capacity that only gets used on the hottest days of the year.
Yeah, Ian, and that actually then leads me to something that you alluded to is district cooling. And one of the things that EESL, as you know, is working on all the tri-generation projects, which in effect are essentially, to give a very simple example, if there is a hotel which has a 3 megawatt load, which 1 megawatt uses, and I'm being simplistic, 1 megawatt is for cooling. You also need lights in the hotel, and let's say 1 megawatt load is for the lights. And the third requirement in a hotel is normally that of hot water and cooking. And again, let's presume it is 1 megawatt. So today it is connected to the grid with a 3 megawatt load. But what we are trying to do, and it is something that has been done wonderfully well across the Western countries, including UK, Europe, is that I will put up a 1.5 megawatt gas generator at the basement of the building. Use natural gas, which is much less polluting as compared to coal, and provide the hotel with the 1 megawatt of electricity that it needs. The heat that comes out of the generator is then used and transformed into cooling. So that if you see the 3 megawatt, all three services go down to 1.5 megawatt. Now, my question is, what needs to be done? Because there's a dichotomy between what is used to be called cherry picking of good consumers of distribution companies. That my best consumers are commercial and industrial, and if they go away and into these innovative technologies, how do you address this dichotomy and on the larger perspective of sustainable cooling?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that we do see in different markets around the world is that it is the utility companies that get involved in these distributed generation systems, things like tri-generation, and actually view that as an opportunity to diversify their portfolio and into space which is incremental to just energy supply. And if you actually look at who some of the major owners are around the world of large thermal plants, so when I say thermal plants, I mean district heating, district cooling plants, very many of those are actually utility companies that have integrated into that space. And obviously, there's advantage with distributed energy systems through increased resilience, but also reduction in loss for distribution and transmission. And for provision of cooling, if we go back to cooling as a utility, you can't distribute over long distances because it's just the pumping energy and the loss of thermal energy through long distribution lines is inefficient. So there's a limitation to how far you can go with distributing heating and cooling needs. So that kind of calls for, if you're going to do thermal energy, so heating and cooling, you need to have distributed plants. And it may well make sense, as you say, to go tri-generation and do supply of heating, of cooling, and electricity from the one distribution side. But it's something that we very much see the utilities kind of moving downstream and getting involved in owning and operating those areas. Typically, some of that is often through the unregulated side, but yeah, that's something we see elsewhere.
Extremely interesting, Ian, and I think now in the second part of what we wanted to discuss is obviously the world is reeling under the effects of COVID-19, and there have been many news reports in the country. There have been guidance issued by various technical bodies as to what to be done insofar as the room air conditioners are concerned, how they should be set. In fact, the government of India issued certain guidance, and I would request if that can be put up for a moment, saying that the chilling systems or even the home air conditioners need to be set. Temperatures need to be set between 24 and 30 degrees, relative humidity between 40 and 70%, so that you can reduce the ingress of oxygen. So, wanted I know Rocky Mountain Institute has done some studies on this. Is there a way in which the pathogen removal can take place by setting temperatures or humidity levels? Or do we need to invest more on certain other filters and filtration systems to remove pathogens from the system?
Yeah, so let me comment first on the guidance from ISRE, which actually I saw that last week, and I thought it was absolutely first class. I mean, the one thing that we do know with this pathogen is that it doesn't like heat and humidity, and its life outside of a host is shorter in hotter and humid environments. The environments that it survives longer and therefore increases transmission risk is cold and dry. So what you don't want to do is to make your home environment cold and dry. That's not a smart thing to do right now. And I think the guidance is absolutely right. I think, there is really, when you think of the other things we can do for thermal comfort, about, how we dress, airflow, things of that kind, we don't need to cool our homes below 24 centigrade. And, yes, we don't want our homes to be above 30 centigrade either. So that is the right range. And really the only reason that I think people cool their homes below 24 centigrade is because they're trying to remove humidity. And there's other and better and cheaper ways to remove humidity than running your air conditioner full blast and lowering the temperature within the space. For the humidity levels, one of the things, and actually this is a kind of a great example of how we're testing the technologies for the Global Cooling Prize, is we're testing based upon being able to meet 27 centigrade indoor temperature and no more than 60% relative humidity. We've said that's kind of like the most efficient, but also conditions that enable human comfort. And it kind of falls right in the range of the ISRE guidance. So I think that's something that's really smart to do. On the question about filtration, one of the things you want to do is you want to bring in fresh air into the environment. That's a good thing to do. So for large systems, that means you're going to have less recycled air, which actually means you're going to use more energy. So it brings a bigger imperative to get more energy efficient equipment. The other thing, which is a risk in larger systems, but not in your small home air conditioners, is that you have this recirculated air that goes from space to space. And in a large building, that can add risk. So you really need to have good filtration systems, HEPA filters, potentially UV germicidal treatment of the air to ensure that the air is filtered and cleaned. And in hospitals, you need to go even further to ensure that air that gets recycled, pathogens are removed from it. In your home environment where you are with your family, the air is only recirculating in your space. And so it's much less of a risk there, but I think filtration will increasingly be viewed as desirable, and I suspect some of the manufacturers will add filtration. I would say our view is that it's not necessary in that contained environment where you're not recirculating into other zones or spaces. But in those where you are recirculating, enhanced filtration, I think we're going to see a big move towards that and greater fresh air intake into buildings until things settle down.
Yeah, I think here you're making two, three very, very critical points. A, we don't need to keep temperatures below 24 degrees. I'm talking about the conditioner. And just to elaborate this point on two things, our body temperature is, normal body temperature is about 36, 37. So we really don't need to go below 8 to 9 degrees or 12 degrees below that. Otherwise, that's number one. Number two, the 1 degree that you reduce the temperature to, your cooling efficiency goes down by about 5 to 10%. So, in effect, if you're using air conditioner at 24 degrees, A, it is giving you thermal comfort, it's also saving on your bills. And the second point it's a big takeaway is that we don't need to panic at our homes to scurry for looking at air filters and trying to, just the normal good maintenance practices of cleaning filters should be more than enough. But certainly, as you mentioned, moving forward, two important things is that, particularly in larger systems, the centrally air-conditioned systems, where there is recycling of air from one part of the building to the other, there certainly the need for more focus on air quality and pathogen removal will come in. Yes, the consequential damage will certainly be on efficiency, and therefore the need for more efficient chillers and central air conditioners. So that brings me to my last segment of this conversation, Iain. How do you think the global market, from the consumer's perspective, will change post-COVID, both on the room air conditioner space and the central air conditioner space? What do you think will be the key drivers now as far as the cooling?
Yeah. So I think we may see some acceleration of trends. So one of the trends that obviously we're in at the moment is seeing this growth in cooling demand, and the kind of the step on technology that people look to first is residential or room air conditioners. They're very accessible. They're relatively affordable from a first cost perspective. And, it represents about 2/3 of the global cooling market. And we've got a lot more people now that are conditioned to working from home. I think even when people go back to the work environment because of social distancing requirements, that may be almost going back in shifts. So I think working from home is going to continue. And I think we're going to see, especially now we're getting into the heat of the summer, that we're going to see an acceleration of demand for room air conditioners. And one of the things I've got to do while I'm on here is there's going to be a lot of people going out and buying a room air conditioner. And there's a few things which are absolute must-dos from an economic perspective for a consumer that I would say. One is only buy an inverter air conditioner. The energy savings from an inverter unit are huge, and the first cost impact is tiny. If you can get a unit that's got dry mode so that you can actually humidify your space without overcooling your space. And if I was buying an air conditioner, I'd want to seek out one of your 7-star units. But if I can't get one, I'd get a 5-star unit, because the difference in efficiency is going to save so much money over the time of operation of that technology. For the large systems, one of the things that we talk about is systems need to be structured for part-time, part-space operation. In other words, you don't want to cool the whole building 24 hours a day. You cool the parts of the building where people are and where there's a demand for cooling. And to do that, you have to be able to modulate supply. That means that you have things like variable refrigerant flow, variable air volume, variable speed drives, all the things that let you modulate supply to only meet the demand where it is. And so that means you have to instrument the building so that you know where that demand is. In other words, the space is occupied, there's people there, that zone is hot, we need to send coof, as we call it, to that zone we don't need to cool the whole building. We need to send it to where it's needed. And so the instrumentation to do that is a very low cost in relation to how much energy that actually saves, because you reduce the volume of the space that you're trying to cool. That, you know, even if you're using relatively inefficient equipment, you're going to save a huge amount of money on energy cost.
Yeah, I think again some very, very relevant points, and I think most of us who are working from home, yes, in India the temperatures are already in mid-30s and late 30s. We only will see a surge in our domestic energy cost, electricity bill, and I think a message coming out loud and clear is, if you just look at the first cost of procuring an air conditioner, remember Iain mentioned that you get it for 35,000-40,000, but over a lifetime, at the current energy tariffs, you spend about 150,000 as electricity bill, which will certainly increase in the next 10 years, maybe become 2 lakhs. And therefore, don't just look at what is the printed cost. Look at the life cycle cost. Look at the efficiency levels mentioned on the air conditioner, which is so very important when you actually operate and when you see the bills that will come to you. So that's one very important takeaway. Number two, of course, is the large buildings need to be more smart. They'll have to, if they don't have a building management or a system or a system which can modulate the load, I think it's, as you rightly said, it is not a very large cost that it entails. So my opinion, Iain, which almost concurs with what you do, that we will see value additions in the cooling space. We will see in the coming months, and as we see, as now people are seeing that the BC and PC era will be two very different eras. BC denotes before Corona, and PC is post-Corona. So the post-Corona world may be very, very different, and the values attributed to air quality, the value attributed to sustainability, cleanliness, is huge. I mean, I'm sure cities in US, as we are seeing here in India, the kind of air quality and the improvement in overall environment scenario is just dramatic. Who would not like to give a lot of impetus to really keep this going as it is? So I think let me end here by once again thanking Iain for very, very insightful thoughts as to how do we take this sustainable cooling agenda forward. I know we have quite a few people who have joined us live, and there are questions that are coming in. So let me just pick up a couple of them and I pose it to so the first one is by Tanya, saying, how will demand patterns change amid COVID in the short term? It's a relevant question.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see increased demand because of that, the discussion that we had about people working from home and an increased number of people working from home. And, you know, we have today, I think, is about 6-7% of Indian households that have access to cooling. I think we're going to see that there's going to be a spike in home residential cooling, and that means you're going to have a lot of first-time buyers. So that's one of the things where we have to help people. When you're a first-time buyer, you have no idea that the appliance you're buying is going to be the biggest energy user in your home by a huge factor. And that's why things like awareness, labeling, you know, things like this discussion that can just help inform people about the cost burden that they're taking on, which isn't the cost of buying the unit, it's going to be the cost of operating the unit. Because so many times that people buy an air conditioner, they've saved up their money to get an air, and then they can't afford to operate.
Yeah. No, it's a very important point, and I think, yes, the demand patterns will change to the extent of adding the value addition, and we really hope that purchase decisions are now taken not just looking at the tag price of equipment, which is normally what is done, particularly in India. But as Iain rightly says, for everyone, including the first-time buyer, one has to look at what are you going to burn as far as the energy bills are concerned. So let me take up the second question, which is by Tosh. We kind of already touched upon this. How can energy efficiency play a key role in reducing the carbon footprint? So certainly, as I mentioned in my opening comment, and we saw that graphic also put out, if we can increase our ambition for energy efficiency, particularly in the room air conditioners, the 150 gigawatt of incremental cooling demand can go down by almost 40% to 90 gigawatts. So, and therefore, the carbon footprint would be an enormously big service that we give to the nation and to the world as such. Let me pose the next question coming from Dipali. It says, how will the global warming and AC cooling be balanced? It's a very important thing.
Yeah, it is, because it's cooling is one of these ones where it's in this vicious cycle of more cooling begets more warming, which increases the demand for more cooling. And how do we get ourselves out of that cycle? And one of the things we talk about is, okay, what is the carbon impact of cooling from a greenhouse gas perspective? And to put it in as simple terms as I can, between the Industrial Revolution and probably 2050, we can't use more than 2,500 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere if we're going to have a hope of holding increasing global temperatures below 1.5 degrees centigrade. Just residential air conditioners today, every year, pump out the equivalent of 2 gigatons of carbon. So that's a significant part of the world's carbon budget. And if this continues and we go to that 4.5 billion units in 2050, and then work with the similar efficiency level as today's units, that's 5.5 gigatons a year. So that's actually when we set the criteria for the cooling prize, we said we need a technology that enables us to ensure that there's no more than 2 gigatons a year associated with cooling when everyone who has need of access has access. And we said, how much lower do you need to be? And we said, you need to have a carbon footprint 80% lower than today's most commonly sold technologies. And then you can neutralize the environmental impact of more cooling. And what you're left with, you can offset with renewable generation. And that's the way that we kind of think about it. If we want to solve this problem, we can't deny access to cooling, but we can make cooling far more efficient and have a much lower carbon footprint.
Yeah, so leads me to another question. I'm jumping the questions, but I think connected to your the answer, the thing that we are doing. I'll just twist the question that, what in your opinion, if you look at the entire regulatory space of cooling in India for the last maybe a decade and a half, how do you think India has progressed in the regulatory framework of cooling as compared to some other countries? And what is it that can be done, given that, that 6% versus 90% in US, it also, the 6% gives the advantage to a policymaker to change the course of the curve, which perhaps is not so much of a luxury in developed countries like. So, A, how do you feel India has dealt with the cooling demand in terms of efficiency? B, what can India do to move towards, as we are saying, flattening the curve, which has now become a usual norm in this?
Yeah, because of the low penetration, I would say that India was perhaps a little slower to start in this space, but it's moving incredibly fast. And the thing I've been most impressed about is learning and then applying before the problem comes. Everyone else is dealing with a problem that's already occurred. What India has done is had both the foresight and the courage to get ahead of the problem before the problem happens. It's the first ever national cooling action plan was produced by India. India produced the first one, then it was China, and then countries in Africa that are producing national cooling action plans. I think that the work that BEE has done of having, which is what industry needs as well, is to put in the performance attributes for each star level, and every 2 years move it and give notice to industry, so industry doesn't get surprised and is able to follow and to keep up. I think that the work that EESL does is unique in relation to demand aggregation and bulk procurement and being at the tip of the spear of the most efficient technologies coming into the market. So, with the work that we've been doing, and we've done a lot of work in this space, including writing the cooling handbook for the World Bank organization, so that their team is briefed about all the things that you can do. Some of the best practices that we've seen and the best policy structures we've seen are coming out of India because of foresight and courage. And there's a lot of countries that are trying to fix this because they're seeing the problem behind them. It takes a lot to see a problem in front of you that is going to predicted to happen but hasn't happened yet, and mobilize resources to avoid it.
Yeah, I think you're right. India has a chance because 70% of India that we will see in 2030 is yet to be built. So this is a unique opportunity before the policymakers to take a path which is more sustainable, which is more efficient, which is more smart as compared to, as you rightly say, countries where it's very difficult to retrofit things. So let me pick up the last two questions, which are kind of similar. One from Dipali Sharma and one from Ram Sisodia. Does EESL provide subsidy? So honestly speaking, I didn't want to raise that issue, but we have by demand aggregation, by procuring ACs in very large quantities, we are right now providing air conditioners which are 7-star. I mean, there's no 7-star, but it is 40% more efficient than a normal 3-star air conditioner at the cost of actually the 3 to 4-star air conditioner. So there is no need for a subsidy per se, and as Iain rightly says, that if you use it, your energy bills will be 40% lower than what you will use the 3-star air conditioner, which may cost you about 36,000. And the second is from Mr. Ram Sisodia, that is there a grant provided from government to control the prices of energy efficient appliances? Yes and no. As I said, wherever you have to push or nudge people to replace their own air conditioner, particularly in places like US, UK, Europe, there is a program, a utility-driven program that happens. But in India, if you look at many things that EESL has done, I mean, the LED program, for example, did not require any subsidy. I mean, today the LED bulbs are being provided at 70, 80 rupees, which is good enough. So you really don't need subsidies. And number three, on this point, in the post-COVID era, when we will see enormous constraints on public money, public exchequer, because there are much more pressing things before the government than perhaps things like subsidizing efficiency and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that this is not important, but the immediate ask would be to provide economic aid to the distressed sector, humanitarian aid to people who have been affected, impacted by COVID, and also health sector. I think this will be an incredible year for virtually all countries across the world, and therefore, as Iain said and I repeated, that there is an inherent reduction in your own cost if you use super efficient equipment, including air conditioner. Iain, would you like to add anything on this?
No, I kind of agree with that, and in a way, I don't think that it's directing a subsidy to an individual purchase. What the government has done is by establishing EESL and supporting the program of your work and effectively taking on that procurement risk as an organization, the government's invested to enable demand aggregation to happen. And I think the investment to enable demand aggregation to happen is far more powerful than providing a small financial subsidy on an equipment price, because it is far more effective. And it's one of the most effective, in fact, from demand aggregation and bulk procurement, this is the most effective program we see in the world.
Yeah, just to add on to what Iain says, and just running the numbers, India sells about 5 million air conditioners every single year. And the normal cost of an air conditioner today in the country is about $700 US. If you subsidize 20%, you're already talking about almost 5 billion US dollars, 7 billion US dollars. I don't, as I mentioned, there is no need for it. Even if there is a need, I would never recommend this to the government to provide subsidy on something which pays for itself. So there's one last question, which is a very interesting question. I know we don't have much time to debate it. Let me pose this question to Iain. Do you think carbon financing would provide a fresh impetus or some sort of a subvention or whatever else you need for super efficient conditions?
So everything helps, and I think that could incrementally help. It's just we don't really have successful markets for pricing carbon and being able to move that to efficiency projects. I think that's something that requires a huge amount of political will. And then you get into all the debates about what's the geographical boundaries of how the financing gets used. I suspect that we'll continue to see that that's more likely to be applied to perhaps things like large district infrastructure, city infrastructure, than it is to residential cooling appliances.
So I think the final question from Ashok Sarkar just come up says, and let me quote, just like 90% of urban residential India is still by ACs, 60% of buildings are yet to be built. How do we integrate energy efficiency cooling more effectively with building design, windows, insulation? I mean, just to add, Ashok, I think this is a larger plan that has already been in the works for a while, the Energy Conservation Building Codes that was released by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency sometime in 2007. They were upgraded, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And as I understand, it is being the states and the municipal bodies in India are being asked to notify these which includes building design, the way buildings have to be, the shading has to be done, the kind of insulation that needs to be put in. So I think it's a very relevant point. And again, what we can say that it's an overall system approach that we need to take from now onwards. And so let me thank Iain for your time. I think we have done pretty well in discussing quite a lot of things, starting from the sustainability to post and pre-COVID era, and also what really helped is very simple, commonsensical things that you told to all of us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to join you, and thank you to everyone that joined the event here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and wish all of you stay safe, healthy, and stay at home. Thank you.